Witchcraft in the 16th Century by Nick Michael, Michael Jensen, Zach Gallus, and Connor Fowler. What were witches? Witches were thought to be controlled by the devil. They had many uncontrollable events that happened to them. For example, they had random outbreaks of loud screaming. They were also able to turn into rabbits or other small animals as a disguise. English witches were generally solitary, or occasionally associated with a few other family members or neighbors. Witches' daughters often followed in their mother's footsteps. They were the lowest of the low in society. Witches were originally hated because the Code of Hammurabi had many different laws against sorcery. Witchcraft was considered an equal crime to rape and murder. When witches would be caught, they would be tortured. For example, they would be burned, drowned, or hung. Swimming witches involved having her left hand or thumb tied to her right foot and her right hand tied to her left foot. The guilty would float and the innocent would sink. The witches would be tortured until they confessed to witchcraft. During the 16th century, between 50,000 and 80,000 witches were executed. All people tried for witchcraft were women, no men. All the evidence suggests that most of those who were tried as witches were antisocial, foul-mouthed, and very unpopular. The civilians thought the witches made an agreement with the devil. They all thought that witches used magic to harm animals and other humans. In England, witches were hung, but in other countries they were burned. Witches sometimes formed models of their intended victims from wax or from clay. When pins were stuck into these models, or when the models of the humans were thrown into a fire, the victim fell ill and sometimes even died. The Salem witch trials were the most famous of all of the witch trials. These trials occurred in the 16th century, and they came about because some people were noticing that the young girls were acting different, so they assumed that they were possessed by the devil. The Puritans of New England were the group of people who first started recognizing this and then accused them of worshiping the devil. In these trials, 20 witches were put on trial because of witchcraft. Some of these witches were hung from trees with bags over their heads. Others were tried using the swimming technique. Within the next few months, many other men, women, and children, besides the original 20, were convicted of witchcraft and were executed in various different ways. In these trials, the youngest person to be convicted of witchcraft was only 9 years old. She was discovered of witchcraft because she had had many uncontrollable outbursts of screaming and many violent actions. Many years later, in the late 16th century, many of the original prosecutors realized that they had done some things wrong, and then they changed their actions. Although, at the time, when the witches were being prosecuted, it was a serious crime, but then later they repented.